Fay Weldon wasn't sure whether she should be expecting me or not, but she'd prepared anyway. Otherwise, she might have stayed in bed and wrote. On the phone, she'd been enthusiastic. There was nothing she liked better, she said, than to talk about the nuts and bolts of the trade. No, she didn't want to see the questions in advance. She preferred spontaneity. She lives in a leafy part of North London in a sunny house, which is a recent acquisition. Weldon, who is 64, offered Coca-Cola rather than coffee. She wears her blonde hair in a bob and seems much younger than her years. For the interview, she perched on the edge of a chaise-longue, her black stockinged feet tucked underneath a tight black skirt. Born in Worcestershire and raised in New Zealand, she was educated at St Andrews University. She has been a professional writer for most of her working life. Writing is in her family's corpuscles. She is one in a long line of jobbing writers, she says matter-of-factly. Her mother was a reluctant romantic novelist, her uncle was a prolific writer of detective novels, and her maternal grandfather founded the influential literary magazine, The English Review. Fay Weldon has worked for the Foreign Office, the Daily Mirror, and in advertising. She married in 1960 and has 4 sons. The marriage was recently dissolved. Her first book was The Fat Woman's Joke, published in 1960, about a greedy couple on a diet. Though she doesn't shrink from criticising individual women, feminism colours her work. Men are exploitative and take the status quo for granted. She has written many plays for stage, radio and television, and is the author of more than 20 novels, including The Life and Loves of a She-Devil and The Cloning of Joanna May, in which a genetic engineer clones his wife.
This is from The Cloning of Joanna May, and it's just about, well, it's about what it says it is. The world turned upside down. I went to Carl's office to have it out with him, but he had it out with me, and took some living cells from my neck, what's more, the kind of good, fresh, bloodless tissue that's rich in DNA. He could grow all kinds of me from that, he's right. Ugly, headless, always miserable, always in pain, 5-legged, 3-headed, double-spined, every leg with perpetual cramp, all heads schizophrenic, and spina bifida twice over, if he wanted, if he could persuade them to do it, that is. And he is a director of Martin's Pharmaceuticals, isn't he? And benefactor of this and that. An interesting experiment, he'd say. A favour. You do this for me, and I'll do that for you. Would they? Snip and snap create a monster? Not if Carl May put it like that, probably not, but if he said humbly, in the cause of knowledge, just let's see if we can, just let's see. Only the once, then never again. For once is ethical, twice is not. Then you never know, they might. But what should I care? What is it to do with me? I wouldn't suffer. The yous might. Poor distorted things.
Excellent. It's wonderful. You know that we are the centre of cloning now, of course.
I do. I've interviewed Dolly the sheep.
Oh, have you?
I went up and interviewed her. I fell absolutely in love with her. I understood why it is that people fall in love with sheep. It was amazing. Yes. I have a picture of me with Dolly, and we gazed into each other's eyes like this. I thought she was the Lamb of God, you see. I really did. I thought she was truly blessed.
And then you're convinced that you were with Dolly.
Yes.
Did you think when you started out as a writer that you were expected as a woman to write a certain kind of fiction? I mean, who, for example, were you expected to model your career on?
Well, I didn't have a career. I mean, it wasn't like that. I didn't mean to be a writer. I didn't hope to be a writer. I didn't see myself as having a career as a writer. I just wrote things and started writing television commercials, then started radio dramas, which seemed much the same kind of thing, a story which sold not a product but an idea. And in today's terms, found a market for it, and then you're asked to do it, and then you go on. And the only thing that ever really makes me think I'm a real writer is that I stop and write short stories every now and then, which shows I must have some desire to do it, other than that people publish what I do.
So you're taking the only a fool ever wrote for anything other than money.
I'm saying the opposite of that. Of course you write. Of course you don't write for the money. You are prudent and you know what publishers will publish and what they won't. But you don't write for the money. You write because you have a need and urge to say something and the ability to do it. No, I'm saying that if you are commissioned all the time to write something, and you can write it, you then do wonder if you are a real writer, because in your head a real writer is somebody who lives in an ivory tower and paces up and down and thinks terribly hard before every word.
Is that what a real writer is?
That's what a real writer is. Yes, a real writer is probably Thomas Hardy, or George Orwell. I think. No, but he was more of a politician, wasn't he? No, a real writer is not me. A real writer lives in an ivory tower and never talks to anyone and is infinitely grand and would never do a programme like this.
The tiny part of you that is a real writer then is this writer who, in blank moments, says, right, I really have a desperate urge to write a short story.
Yes.
And nobody has asked for it.
No, exactly. Yes, and very often nobody prints them anyway. But you do it because, partly to get it out of your head because it is interfering with what's in the longer project that you're involved in. But sometimes it simply waits to be written.
You had no ambition at all to begin with then to be a writer. You didn't say, oh look at the career of George Eliot or the big name writers.
Certainly not, no.
Yeah.
I came from a family which wrote to pay the rent. Although in fact, oddly, I never met my grandfather or my uncle till much later. They were both novelists, and my mother wrote novels in order, as I say, to pay the rent and feed the family. So it never seemed to me anything to be particularly desired, because it was obviously so hard.
But for other people wanting to become a writer, they need to be shown a way. They're used to people working in the civil service or on the railway or in a factory, but it wasn't for you like that.
Well, if you want to write, and if you wanting to be a writer is a great pitfall. Wanting to write is something completely different. You then write it, and all you need really is some paper and a pencil and a blank pad and what's in your head. That's it. I keep telling people this. They look at me very crossly.
What is actually the motivation for you then when you get up in the morning and write? Is it because you've been asked to write something? You have a commission and you say, right, I'll get my head round this and I'll start now.
Well, I say that. If I'm thinking that, and I sometimes do, I say that, but I don't start. You see, you do anything in the world. I mean, it's not all that different from writing school essays. Partly you want to because you know it, partly because you have to, partly because partly almost because you're going to be graded, and you put it because you want to know that. And you put it off. And if some people sort of start at the beginning sensibly and rationally and work their way through it and present it on time, other people don't write it and don't write it and don't write and worry about not writing it, get drunk, stay up all night, finally write it and hand it in. And I'm one of that kind of writer.
Can you describe your writing day? I mean, you're a morning person, an afternoon person. Do you write before you have a cup of coffee? I mean, what's your routine when you're actually sitting at the desk writing, or should be sitting at the desk writing?
Well, there kind of isn't a routine. Where are we? Saturday morning. You came at 11 o'clock. I can work backwards. I'm writing an article. I got out of bed. I didn't get to bed till about 2, so I didn't wake up till about 10. Which is actually quite useful because you tend to start writing in your head in your sleep before that. So I got out of bed and wrote down the last sentence of an article I was writing, about which I'm two-thirds of the way through, because otherwise I would forget that. So I got up, had some breakfast, did a piece of some jigsaw puzzle, had you in the book actually for next week, not last week, wondered if you would come or not, wrote a bit more of the article, lost the bit of paper on which I had written the last line, which was a very good line. When I tried to recall it, I couldn't, so it was just as well I'd written it down. When you go, I will look for the line on a bit of paper and write it in.
And can you write at a stretch? I mean, can you sit down and do, say, 4 or 5 hour stretch at it?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
It depends very much what you're doing. A lot of it depends on your general state of health. I really think it does, and you can't really anymore drink or stay up late and expect to work like that the next day. I think it's rather like it's rather like a well, and which is filling naturally, and you either draw it all off at once and you do your 4 hours at a stretch, 5 hours at a stretch, longer even sometimes, really. But then you can't work for another couple of days, 2 or 3 days, while it fills up. So you might as well, if only you could, do it rationally and steadily every day. You would get as much done. But you do tire. I mean, it is a very kind of tiring thing to do, really, writing.
It doesn't seem to be. It's not hewing at a coal face, but at the same time, most writers would acknowledge that it is incredibly tiring physically. They feel drained.
It's not tiring. Well, it's tiring mentally, and if you. I mean, you can't do physical exercise, fortunately. You in the morning. I mean, you could do it in the evening, but if you do it in the morning, I mean, if you sort of go for a walk in the morning, there's nothing left in your head by the time you get back, because it's all, all your energy is kind of, making your legs walk up and down or jog or any of the rest of it. So if you do any physical exercise in the morning, the rest, I can't think anymore. I mean, it's quite nice not thinking. It's a perfectly pleasant state to be in, but it's not much good if you do get this stuff on paper.
Do you plan a book, a novel, when you're starting out, or do you expect it to take you where you want to go? Do you have a first line, for example? Do you need a first line? Do you need a title before you start?
It varies. Mostly I have a title. Mostly I have a sentence. Then and a kind of I mean, you would be foolish not to have some idea of it. You need to know. You need to know what you're writing about, and you need to get you need to know the voice you're writing it in, and you need to know what the kind of rhythms of the language are that you're going to use, and then if those all gel together, and you sort of, I mean, you need to kind of feel the subtext as well, and then if all that's working, or you sort of know how that is going to kind of break through the top, then you begin.
Do you recognise your own voice in your work, in your fiction, and do you say that could only have been written by me?
Oh yeah, I mean, I often go and read aloud and read it at readings, and then just think, did I really say that? But I mean, can I have meant that? But
it does seem to me that you have a very distinctive style and a very recognisable voice. Some writers don't want to have a distinctive style. They try to obliterate themselves.
But that just seems very boring. I mean, why? And it's not. You can't do that. I mean, journalism, you can recognise people if you know their work. It's because it's a matter of selection all the time. I mean, of all the words in the universe, you're selecting these, and you cannot keep your personality out of it.
How would you describe your personality then when you read yourself or think about yourself as a writer? What are the distinctive Weldonian hallmarks?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, I couldn't tell you because I believe this is how everybody thinks and feels and writes. But I mean, I know when I read it. My editor says most contemporary fiction is based on me, which I think is rather flattering of her. But she says she complains that she gets all the novels she gets handed in are sub me and or think that is how writing, contemporary writing is done. I mean, it isn't. This was my solution early on, and began sort of as soon as I wrote, of having too much to say and too little space to do it in.
Do you worry about posterity at all? Is that something that you that motivates you even, that you think, well, 100 years from now people will be walking into libraries and reading me and I'll be in Penguin Classics or something?
I don't know what makes you think there will be a library. 50 years from now. I don't know what makes you feel that anybody will be reading fiction anymore, because it seems to me, if you watch Oprah or any of those other shows, that fiction can never come up to real life experience, other than that, at least in fiction, you know how things worked out in the end, and very often, apart from a subtitle or so on the screen, you don't know that. I think it would be very foolish to believe that a posterity would work as we work now. But I go on doing my archive. I mean, I go on, which some university has sort of carts away from me from time to time, and I put all kinds of stuff in it, and sometimes I make up correspondences in order to keep the kind of future busy, happy and puzzled.
It's incredibly mischievous of you. It's probably just as well that we're recording it now.
I write fiction and have very little regard for truth.
Do you deliberately set out to provoke? It seems to me that, even reading down the Fay Weldon title list, the confrontational, the striking attitude, even from the first,
Well, yes. Well, you see, did occur to me very early on, I think, that the image you have of a writer is the sum of the titles, you see. And that actually what you would have to do would be, you would have to sort of develop a run of titles which would give a kind of character profile, you see, and of the writer. And this I think I tried to do. It went very, if you read that list, it went very sort of hearts and lives and men and love and stuff like that. And then you realise it's getting much too female, and so you have to put in something like the Shrapnel Academy or the President's Child or the cloning, which is always, Joanna May was a bit soft at the end of that.
You were quite early into the cloning, weren't you? The whole thing.
Oh, well, yes, but it always seemed so astonishing in the way ahead. But it was also part of what, really, I suppose, of what constitutes identity or what constitutes personality. And Life and Loves of a She-Devil was very successful, was a sort of two parts of the same person, sort of a double identity, sort of mixing and changing. And then the early books were sort of divided women into three, and you would just write separate, which was sort of the erotic, the maternal, and the intellectual, which ended up as a job really, and so you would almost divide one person into three, and then write about the separate parts of this character as if they were separate people. Then the cloning of Joanna May was what happened if you put four different personalities into one body, and then splitting was about. A split personality was about lots of personalities still in one body, and so on.
But someone like the Lives and Loves of a She-Devil was one of those books that spill out of the literary pages and are picked up by the feature writers and the late-night discussions and saying, well, what horrible thing is this that's been visited upon us? What new advance in the male-female relationship does this mark?
Well, I mean, that's not my business. I mean, I'm just the writer around here,
You sound very disingenuous, I have to say, for someone who is pretty good at the market research and knows how to order typographically paragraphs. The fact that you just send a book out to the ether and say, well, I'm a bit surprised the way they've taken it up.
No, I'm not surprised the way they've taken it up. I mean, Life and Loves of a She-Devil was archetypal. You don't know that it's archetypal when you write it. You don't set out to write this kind of novel. Now I come to think of it, what you say is true. What one should write is archetypal novels. Thank you.
Can you just describe the situations in which you like to write? Describe, for example, this room that we're in now. Is this the kind of room you like to write in?
Well, this is the office, and it has books, and it has computers, and it has shelves, and it has some quite nice furniture, and it has a nice kind of yellow couch with a frilly cushion you can sort of lie upon, and as if you were Barbara Cartland, but mostly my husband lies upon it and kind of puts his feet up and comments on the work as it progresses. And and it's got a lot of telephones and many answer machines and a rather sort of arty clock over there and a couple of nice dogs in porcelain, not real ones.
And you
And a
always
good
need windows for a
carpet
view?
and barred windows in case the burglars get in. But it's a nice room, is it not?
Yes.
And it's got some quite nice paintings on the wall.
Who are these paintings by?
That one's a Bellany, and that one's Elizabeth Fring. Bellany, a Scottish artist.
John Bellamy.
John
yes.
Bellany, and there's another one over there, and there's another one in the next room. So that's right. But I don't often. I write articles in here. I write non-fiction in here, but I write fiction in bed.
You write your fiction in bed?
Yes.
Well, that's very interesting. I don't think I've ever come across a writer who writes fiction in bed. I mean, what hour do you start? And how long can you go on before the paper?
Well, I mean, the trouble is, once you get dressed, you see, the day begins and the phone's going. You have to respond to the real world, and so really, you write out of dreams in bed, and you don't get up. The minute you put your clothes on, you've had it. You see.
It seems then you have lives and loves. The lives begin in this office when you're working on the non-fiction and the articles, and there's the loves in the bedroom where you're dreaming
Yes, that's very
time.
cute of you. That's very cute. Yes.
But it's very clever to have it divided. Was it always like that?
Yes. Yes. Or when I began, and when I was working as well and had children, the only time you could write was to sort of get up at 5 a.m, and then there would be that kind of time when everybody else in the house is sleeping and breathing sort of properly, which you also need if you're going to write. I mean, I can't do it in isolation or without people, or really. Because
You need people around you?
Yes.
Yes. With music, can you write with music around you too?
Yes.
Could you write in a public place?
Yes. Yes, because you only need a pad and a pencil, and I have done that. And I used to write on the train. When I used to live in Somerset, I'd write on the train every morning, and that was brilliant. That was 1.5 hours of something, sort of people around, not communicating, and sort of landscape going by. So there was both sort of activity and silence.
And have you ever had writer's block? Has there ever been a period where you couldn't write?
I mean, every day I have a writer's block. You have to read the back of the cornflake packet rather than do any work. And yes, I mean, you can be blocked on something, on a novel, on something like that, and then you just have to trust your unconscious to solve it, and it can take a week. But you get to know that so what you're doing is solving something, even though it's not particularly at a conscious level. But while you're doing that, you can get on with other things. So, it can get a bit frightening, but it solves itself. And it's often something to do with something you wrote sort of a page or two back, and something which actually has set up some other irrelevance. Or so you have to go back a couple of pages and look and see what it was you wrote rather carefully to see if there's something there that actually has held you up intolerably.
And has criticism ever hurt you at all?
Oh, every day. I mean, no, these are daily occurrences. Yes, I mean, obviously, I want to be universally loved and approved of by everybody.
And has any reviewer ever said anything that was of any use to you?
Yes, frequently. Yes, of course. Well, perhaps rather more in the past than they do now. Yes, I think it shows you they're sort of like they're the same sort of reading and noting test you used to get in the advertising agency, in which people have gone through what you wrote and marked up with marks what it is that people have remembered, and you that is the process by which you learn how to communicate. You learn what people believe, what they don't believe, what they act on, what they don't act on, how they accept things, what makes them not accept it. And it's the same with reviewers. If they hate it, you've failed in some respect, and you look at it and try and work out how it is you failed, and try and do better next time. Or you decide they're completely wrong, and what you need to do is to go into the skid and do far more of what they hate, and far less of what they think you should do. I have to stop myself. telling the writer how to do it, or saying what they should have done, or if only, or or actually sort of writing tutorial notes on this novel rather than a review. But I see no point at all in critical or disparaging reviews. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Novels work by a kind of sort of group enthusiasm and the kind of faith of the reader in the writer. And if that's discouraged, it just seems a sort of miserable kind of thing to do. And as a reviewer, and I do get asked to review things, and sometimes they're so interesting you can't help it. But if you don't like it, you don't do it. I mean, you just say no. I'm not going to attack another writer or damage another writer or disparage another writer, because it's such a difficult thing to do, so amazing that they did it at all, and it's so likely to go wrong.
Thank you very much.